Welcome to episode 28 of The Mobile Classroom, the weekly video podcast where we demonstrate today's most popular technologies. I'm James Messer, and this week we're going to talk about KeePass. This is a password safe that you can use to centralize all your passwords, have everything in one place, automate the entry of passwords into other websites. So if you've ever been trying to find a way to have different passwords on every website and get out of the very bad habit of using the same username and the same password for every site you go to, then you're going to be really interested in learning more about KeePass. This week's podcast is absolutely free. From beginning to end, you get to see every single second of what we're doing this week. If you've watched our podcasts before, then you know that every third podcast we do is one exclusively for members only. You'll see a few minutes of that particular week's podcast. That last podcast was last week, so now you've got a couple of videos for free before we have another members-only podcast. If you are a member, you do have something that's a little bit more than what most people get, which is the ability to see every video in full 720p HD resolution. So if you'd like to have a crystal clear view of what you're seeing on these podcasts, and you'd like to support our podcasts every week, you can go to our website and learn more at themobileclassroom.com/members. Today, we're going to learn all about this idea of a password safe, a place where we can take every password that we use in every single program we might use, whether it's in a browser, whether it's something we use on our Windows desktop. Just think about having a way to automate and have stored a centralized set of every single username and password you have. Now, obviously, when you think about that and having all of that very, very important information in one place, the questions come up about, is this reasonable to do? Is this something from a security perspective you should consider? Is this probably something you should worry about? What if somebody was to get a hold of this very secret password file? What could they do with it? We'll talk about that as well. We're going to talk about how you would just use it day to day. We'll install KeePass on our machine. We'll connect to a website. We'll add some passwords to it, and I'll show you just how easy it is to use this and at the same time be very secure in how to use it. I'll also go through a number of advanced features, so you'll be able to see exactly how we're able to take advantage of KeePass's more advanced functionality and be able to use it in almost any scenario you might run into. I really started using more password safes, digital wallets, password keepers like this when I got an email from a website that I was a member of that said, guess what? We were compromised, and everybody's username and password was also compromised. And that made me realize that I was using probably pretty much the same username and almost certainly the same password for every website. It's one of these bad ideas. You certainly don't want to do this, but I was doing it. And almost everybody does that because you visit so many websites. I must have 300 different websites that I log into. How could I possibly remember all of those passwords? And when you start going and back when something like that happens and trying to figure out what other websites have this username and password, it becomes a massive undertaking to go back and change all of that. Well, what if you had a different password for every website? At least that would limit your liability. If somebody did compromise the password on one website, there would be no possible way for them to compromise this password anywhere else. One thing you also might not be aware of is that the people who own these websites where you are storing your username and password may also be storing your username and password in plain text. They may not be able to encrypt your password on their website because that password may be used for multiple logins into different devices and different modules on that website. So on the back tier, functionally, they can't encrypt that. They just have to keep it safe. So being able to have a different password on every website is extremely important. This also gives us a central place to manage everything. So if we started up KeePass and we wanted to look and have one central place to administer everything, to manage all of our passwords, to be able to change or modify some passwords that we're using, KeePass is a very, very easy way to do that. And lastly, an important thing to consider is that This would be a centralized database that would be very secure. We're going to use encryption to make sure that nobody can do anything with this, but it's always available. We can use it on multiple platforms. There's a KeePass for Windows. There's one for your iPhone. There's one for a Linux machine. There's one on Mac OS. So this is a place where we can have a centralized password and use it no matter where we might be, wherever we might go. There's also some nice functionality to have KeePass on a mobile key fob, a memory stick that we might want to take around with us on USB. And that way you just have it wherever you go. And you get to decide just how secure you'd like to be with this. A lot of functionality. We're going to go through all of that in this episode. If you've ever used a password safe before, whether it's something that's been a commercial product, a free product, or any one of those, then you know there are certain things that a password safe is always going to be able to do for you. One is to, of course, have a central database for all your passwords. That becomes really important. There's also some nice password generators in here. Have you ever had to try to figure out a new password for a website? Sometimes it's any name or any number you can type in. Sometimes they need a capital letter. They need a number as well as letters inside of it. They'd like something that's a little more complex that would be a little more difficult for someone to figure out. If you go to financial sites, it's very common that they want a very complex password. And so built into these password safe programs like KeePass is the ability to generate passwords and have those available too. So you click one button, it figures out the password for you. It's a random grouping of letters and numbers and uppercase and lowercase, but because you're consolidating this in a central database, you don't even have to memorize that. You just tell KeePass to memorize it, and it will always use that password when it goes to that website. There's an automated way also to enter these passwords. So you go to the website, you click a button, you type something on your keyboard, and it automatically fills in the password for you. So you now no longer have to manually type in your username and password, and oops, I accidentally typed in the wrong username, or I misspelled the password. Those days are over. You click one button and it automates this for you very, very easily. We'll do that. And as I mentioned, you can use this on multiple platforms. So no matter where you go and what browser you're using, you'll always have these passwords available to you. Whenever I mention using a password safe to somebody who's never used one before, the first thing they think is this has got to be a bad idea. In the past, we've taken our passwords, maybe we've listed them out in a text file and we've stored that text file somewhere. Maybe we write them on a piece of paper and keep the piece of paper nearby. Those types of methods of storing passwords are actually much less secure than having something like KeePass or another password safe to be able to do that. So safety is really, really important. One of the nice capabilities of these password safes is that it encrypts everything. A very good example on the KeePass website is that all of these passwords are stored with a type of encryption that is first very cryptographically secure. Nobody knows how to hack into those cryptographic encryption methodologies, so you can feel very secure about having your data stored in that format. And secondly, they store it in a key that's so big that you don't have the computing power available today to do a brute force attack of that and try to figure it out based on every possible random permutation. It's just not possible these days. So having that encrypted database there is very, very useful for us to have. It also encrypts this information in memory. So if you were infected with spyware or malware and it's looking for your passwords and it's trying to figure out what you're typing in, you can be assured that these types of programs, when they are using it, are encrypting it in memory as well. So a very, very important advantage here is that nothing can sneak around that and figure out all your usernames and passwords from that. There's also some very nice capabilities in here to fool keyloggers. A number of pieces of spyware on your machine may be designed to watch every key that you press, and at a certain time of day, it will send that database of keys that it has watched you type in to a centralized server where the bad guys will now have access to your usernames and passwords. Well, there's some really nice functionality in KeePass that we're going to use that actually can fool the keyloggers into thinking that you're typing something. It scrambles it up and they don't even know what your password is. In many cases, can't figure out what your username is either. And lastly, there is a master password that you can use, a master password file, or you can set up a key file that you can take with you, which means you must have this file to be able to decrypt all of your passwords. You can also combine this. You have to have the file and you have to have a passphrase to get into that file to be able to then decrypt all of your passwords. So you can make this as secure as you would like, or as easy to use as you would like. We'll talk about doing both of those. I'll show you just how easy it is to do all of that. Let's install KeePass. I'll show you how simple it is to get installed, and we'll set up a username and password and be able to log into a website. You can find the KeePass website at keepass.info, and here you'll be able to download this absolutely free program and install it on your platform. You can see there are a lot of explanations. Their website, extremely well done. A lot of help capabilities on here. It's extremely well documented, especially when you think about free programs. If you've ever used a lot of free or open source programs before, you know that sometimes the documentation is perhaps not the strongest suit. Here, everything is extremely well documented. It helps that this particular application is one of the most popular password storing programs there is. So there's a lot of people that help participate and a lot of focus on making sure this is a high quality product. To get KeePass, we'll type our download link here and go to the download page. One thing you'll notice on the download page is there's two versions. There is a KeePass 1.17, which they call the Classic Edition. Some people like that classic mode. There are functionalities there, and that's all they need. The Professional Edition has some additional capabilities. It's version 2.10 currently, so you have a version 1. And a 2. They're all free. There is no difference between the two as far as cost involved, but if you'd like to see the differences, there is a comparison table here that shows you the differences, and you can start to see in the 2.x version, there's things like full Unicode support. So if you need to use this internationally, perhaps have special characters in your passwords, that becomes pretty important. You can see the differences in the encryption algorithms, some key sources here. Here's a real big difference in KeePass 2.0. You can have this tied to a Windows user account, which means the user account itself, if you logged in and authenticated via Windows, then KeePass will use that same methodology to keep and store the information. When you get into some of these groups and entries functionalities, notice there are a lot of pieces here about using icons and notes and subgroups in the recycle bin. KeePass 2.x has a lot of those versus 1.x. So on our path today, I'm going to choose to use the 2.x version from the downloads page. I'm going to use the installer exe for Windows because that's just easy for me to use. But if you're using this and want to run it from a USB key, or you don't want to install anything else along with it, you can use the zip package. KeePass is designed so that you can simply unzip it to a directory and run it from there. There's no registry entries. There's no any files. It is very, very simplistic in how it uses the operating system piece. That's so that it can be very, very portable and very easy to remove from a machine if you ever need to do that. You notice also down here, by the way, the contributed ports and builds for the iPhone, for the BlackBerry, for Linux, for pre-installed environments, for Android. So you can see KeePass has a lot of people that help support this database and use it across these different pieces. These are unofficial builds, and these applications are ones that you can use on those other operating systems, but just keep in mind that that is another third party that's using KeePass databases to make it easier to use on those different platforms. I'm going to download the installer exe for Windows, and we'll have it go to our SourceForge. It'll ask us where we would like to download this from. Since this is on SourceForge, it will find one of the mirrors automatically and start downloading the application. And once we get it installed or downloaded to our hard drive, we'll begin the installation process. Here's my Chrome download list. There's my KeePass setup that I've just downloaded. I'm going to click that button to install it. Windows XP tells me I can't verify the publisher. Are you sure you want to run it? I do. Let's run this program. Select the language. English sounds good to me. Welcome to the setup wizard. Click next to continue. I accept the GNU General Public License for this. And it says, where do you want to put it? Under Program Files, KeePass Password Safe 2. We'll click next. I'm going to install everything. Make sure that we have all the different libraries, the help manual, everything will be local for us. And then I'll click next to put it into that folder. Everything that is a KDBX, that's the KeePass database files, I want to associate all files with that. You could possibly create multiple different databases for different functionalities. I'd like to have that associated. We'll click next, and that sounds good, and install. Just like any other Windows program, pretty basic installation. You keep clicking next. It takes the defaults, and in this case, the defaults are really good to use, and it goes through and installs the password safe program on our computer. When you start KeePass for the first time, you get this blank page. There's really nothing that's been set up so far. So what we'd like to do at the very first beginning of this is set up a database that we will use to store all of our usernames and passwords. If you go to the File pull-down menu, there's an option here for New. And I would like to create a new database. That's the name that comes up. I'm going to call my database the Mobile Classroom and hit Enter. Then it gives you some options on how you would like to protect this database. Now, in my case, I think a master password that I will use to access this database should be pretty good. Now, you have to remember this master password because you want to be sure that you have access to this database. You might put hundreds of different usernames and passwords in here. If you forget this master password, that's too bad. You do not have access then to any of that information. So you have to make sure it's something you will remember. You'll be typing this in a bit when you start up KeePass, so this isn't something that will age out over time in your mind. You'll always have this top of mind, but you also want to make this something that's complex enough that nobody would be able to guess it if they got access to your machine or to that database. So I'm going to put in a password here that's relatively simple, and you'll see the estimated quality of the password is also relatively simple. If I put in a password that's a little bit more complex with some upper cases and some lower cases, and it's a little bit longer, you can see that I'm getting a better quality of that database in here. Now, if you would like to even have this more protected so that you would only have access to this file, this database itself, if you also had a key file, then you can create a key file separately. It will automatically build a key file for you. Now, what becomes very important is that you always have that key file. If you ever lose the key file, you will no longer have access to this database. So you have to think about how you want to be able to use this. If you have a key file, you may want to have more than one copy of it. One perhaps you have on a USB key, and one that you might have stored somewhere else. And maybe a third also off-site somewhere, just to make sure that you don't accidentally find yourself without that key file, because you cannot recreate that after the fact. We are not going to do a key file for this particular overview. I usually don't use a key file because I can't trust that I'm going to always have that key file available. And the last option we have here is a Windows user account. This is really interesting if you're running Windows because it links your Windows user account to the database. And they make a very special point here is that if the Windows account is lost, it will not be enough to create a new account with the same username and password. You must have a backup of the entire user account. The encryption is based on the original user account. It's not something that could be built out of thin air again. It even says if you don't know how to do this backup and restore of the entire user account, do not enable this option. And I highly recommend that if you aren't going to plan on having a backup of your username and password data account, your entire user account, just don't even use that option. So we're going to use this master password option here that will be used to encrypt the database. And we'll click OK. It then says, how would you like to configure this database? We can give this database a name. We can give it a description. We can use a default username for new entries. There are options for security and the type of encryption algorithm that you would like to use. In this 2.0 version, we're using AES at a 256-bit key. That's your only option, actually. And you can see there are other options for key transformation, different methodologies on what is protected in memory, compression algorithms that are used, how this is used from a recycle bin perspective. Do we want to save some of this information before it is permanently deleted? And there are some default templates that may be used prior to us having this in here that we might want to use for this database. In our case, we're going to use exactly the defaults and click OK. And that's it. It sets up for us the Mobile Classroom database file. It has a lot of different folders that it's just created for us. These are groups that are created automatically. You can remove these groups. You can add new groups. You can change the format of these groups and where they appear on the screen. And it's created for us a sample entry database that we will use a sample keyword, username, and password that we can use to get into a site. And now we've got everything we need to start saving our usernames, saving our passwords, and automating the process of storing these on our machine. Now that we have KeePass installed, it becomes very easy to add usernames, passwords, and automate the process whenever we go to a website where we need to type in a username and password. Let's see how that's done. For our first example of defining a username and password in the login, I'm going to set up KeePass to log in automatically to YouTube, or at least set it up to remember my username and password to YouTube. And then we'll extend that and do some automation and show how to use that username and password. When you go to the YouTube page, there's an option here to sign in. I'm going to click on that. That brings us to the page that we would normally type in our username and password. So what I'd like to do is define that inside of my KeePass. So let's flip over to our KeePass page. Here we go. I've chosen the internet group, which is just a place where I can organize and store all of my different passwords. If I right mouse click in here, there's an option to add an entry. And I'm going to call this entry YouTube, except I'm going to spell it properly. There we go. And now it asks what username I'll be using for YouTube. I'm going to put in the mobile classroom username, and then it wants the password that is used in YouTube, and I'll type in my password, make sure I get that right. I think that's correct. We'll be testing this out in just a moment, and we'll know. It tells you the quality of the password that you have there. It gives you some examples of maybe you should improve the quality of that password or not. Here's the URL, and that's where I want to take the URL from up here. That's our login page, and then just Control-V paste it right into this view. And that way it will always go back to this page if I wanted to automate this process later on. And if you'd like to put some notes in here, you can always type some specific notes about what this page is, what this account is referencing, what it means to have this particular account log in. That looks good, and I'm going to click OK. And there we are. There's our YouTube account that we've created with the mobile classroom and the password that we have in here and that big URL that we've got in this view. Now let's test it. What I'm going to do is really just close out of this YouTube page and the downloads page. We'll clear this out too, that we have no tabs up on our screen at all, no browsers that are started. I'm going to right mouse click on this, and you'll see there's a lot of different options available to us now. If we would like in this URL view to open this up in the browser, we can choose this link, or we can simply type Control-U. And it's going to go right to that URL that we've defined in KeePass and bring us up to this page. Now, some of the things that we can do here is from this KeePass, if you right mouse click, you can do some things like copy the username from here, go back to your browser and paste in the username. And then you can go to your password page. I think I have overwritten my password there. Just a moment, and we'll paste this in. That looks a little bit better. And then under the password, we can right mouse click, copy the password, and then paste our password in and sign in. I'm going to say not to stay signed in. We'll just sign in that way. And that takes us to our YouTube account, and we're signed in right now as the mobile classroom. So now I can't see my password any longer. It's now stored in my database, but that's just one way that we're able to take in what's in our database, paste it into the browser, and have it work that way. But that's a little bit tedious, this copying and this pasting. So I'm going to sign out of here, and I'm going to sign back in, and I'm going to do another capability in my KeePass, which is to grab this username. I'm just going to click the username and drag it over and drop it. And then I'm going to click the password and drag it over and drop it, and then click sign in, which I did exactly the same thing, automated the process for me a bit and logged me in as the mobile classroom. But that still requires that I copy and paste, or I drag, I get that window up and running and I drag it in the proper way. There's some other ways to do this as well. You can see that this name on here is YouTube. The name on this browser screen is YouTube. This is synced up pretty well. What this allows us to do is go to any page and we type in a key on our keyboard, which is Control-Alt-A. It's going to go to automatically put all of those usernames and passwords that match what happens to be up there in the title bar. So it saw what I had on the title bar as YouTube. It looked through all of my usernames and passwords in KeePass. In this case, there was only one. And then it found the YouTube record and said, well, just automatically type in the username and automatically type in the password. And just like that, we're logged in. That was much quicker than the processes earlier, and now it's completely automated. I can start putting in my usernames and passwords for my Google Mail, for my YouTube, for my Yahoo Mail, for any other things I might have on my computer. And the way that it's set up this auto type is it types in the username, it hits the tab automatically, it types in the password, it hits a tab, and it hits enter. So that automatic process can also be customized because not every every website you go to or every automatic login you go to will need that function. So you can also customize that process too. A lot of functionality there, and look how easy it was just to sign into YouTube. I mentioned earlier that some of the security capabilities in KeePass allow us to do things like protect our logins or usernames and password from being seen by keyloggers. I also talked about having functionality of generating some passwords for us automatically, so we can then just use those passwords whenever we'd like. That makes a very, very secure password for us. And there's also some very nice plugins you can get for KeePass. Let's have a look at some of those. From our KeePass front end, I'm going to right mouse click on that YouTube account that we created. I'm going to do a couple of things here. One that I'd like to show you is I want to duplicate this entry. And then I'm going to edit this particular entry because I have more than one YouTube account. I have a personal account and I have a work account. And so I have a Professor Messer account that I like to use. And I think I remember the password. It may or may not be exactly the same. Now that I'm thinking about it, we're about to find out. And I'm going to put this in here. Now, one interesting thing about this is that it has YouTube as both of the names. And so the question is going to be is when we go over to YouTube and we click sign in and we click our magic keystrokes, Control-Alt-A, notice that it doesn't put any one of those in automatically. It stops and says, whoa, we've got some duplicates here. Which account do you really want to use for this? And then you can choose the one, either the Professor Messer account or the mobile classroom account and click OK, and then chooses the right one. So you really can't go wrong. You're going to really have a multiple logins for a single site, have them all stored in KeePass, and that makes it very easy. Now let's see how we might want to fool the keyloggers when we do that. Let's go back to our KeePass, and just to simplify this a little bit, I'm going to hit the delete key and get rid of that one we just created, and then I'm going to click the right mouse click on the mobile classroom record, and let's edit this entry. I could also hit enter to do that. Some of the automatic capabilities in here, or more advanced capabilities, are to change some of the fields that we would put a name into. Maybe we have a username, a password, and a zip code field. We can add other fields into that. There's other properties for this to change the foreground and background color or override the URL that's being used here. The one that I'd like to show right now is the auto type, where you can do something called a 2-channel auto type obfuscation. That means that this KeePass program is going to scramble up the way that it types in your username and your password. I would like to use this. One thing to keep in mind, and it tells you this when you turn it on, this may not work in every single program or every single window you might use. So make sure you check the documentation if you're wondering if this is something that's going to work on a website for you. A lot of financial sites are set up not to allow this type of thing, so that it's very clear that when you're typing something in, you're typing it in manually and it's not automated. So in this particular case, YouTube, it works just great. So we're going to use this, and I'm going to click OK. Now, what's going to be interesting about this is I want you to watch whenever we automatically type in a username and password into YouTube. And what you're going to see is the password types in a little bit at a time in different ways. And it's not as if you were manually typing it in anymore. It scrambles it up a little bit. So I'm going to hit my Control, my Alt, and my A. And notice that it scrambled it up as it typed that in. That's very interesting. Now that if you were storing that in a file, you may not even be able to read the mobile classroom as my username. It's just going to be a bunch of scrambled letters all put together. And if the bad guys are looking at that, certainly if you have a password that's a scrambled bunch of letters and numbers, they would never be able to recreate the password from that piece. Very nice to have, nice functionality. And if you want to be more secure and make sure that nobody's able to read these username and passwords, it's a great way to do it. What if we were logging into a website for the first time and it says, enter your username and what password would you like to use? And you would like to use a very, very good password for this. The KeePass has a tools pull-down menu that has generate a password right here. There are a lot of different options here for generating passwords. The default generated password is 20. I've changed mine to 10. I say just uppercase, lowercase digits. You can also choose to add minus signs or underlines or other special characters to this. A lot of functionality there. I could generate it using a particular pattern, or I could have it randomly permute characters of a password, or I can use a custom algorithm to do this password. I also have the option here to collect additional entropy for this. One thing that's a very common thing to run into in the cryptographic world is the ability to do randomization in a computer isn't truly random. It's called pseudo-random. Because it is a computer, it tends to do the same thing every time. So one of the things you can do with entropy is add additional variability into the creation of the password. And I'm going to turn that on so you get to see what that's about. There's some other advanced capabilities where you can say no repeating characters or exclude lookalike characters. I've turned those on. And so this is something that I like to use because I know there are programs that will go out there and try to change the word. If you try to use the word movie for a password and instead of an O, you put a 0. There are programs that will try those different permutations. I'm going to make sure that there are no lookalike characters in any of my passwords. And notice that it says this is going to reduce the security of these generated passwords primarily because we are changing and limiting the number of characters we'll be able to use in this. But I want you to see those different options. And it gives you a preview of what this might look like based on some of the examples that you gave. Well, now I'd like to actually do some. So I want to click a key, and it's going to create some passwords for us. And it says, here's the entropy collection I talked about earlier. You can either type in some random characters, or you can just move your mouse around in the static field, and it's going to create some entropy. So the idea is that nobody could actually come back in here and move your mouse in the little squiggles that you're moving it right now to try to recreate that. It's a very good way to have some randomization, some real human induced randomization into this. And we'll click OK. And now it's created for us a separate record that has a separate password in it that we'll have based on what we had there. So in this case, we don't even see that password. We can now build a separate key around this. Very, very simple to do. And you can also generate a password list if that's what you'd like to do so that you can actually see the passwords. Let's create 10 new passwords for us and create some entropy because maybe you'd like to copy and paste those in and see what they are yourself. Now you've got those to do. And you can view these passwords and stick them into a notepad or view them in different ways. Just another way so that you don't have to worry about creating a password or worrying that the password that you're creating isn't as secure as it could be. Just have this KeePass do that for you, and now it's created all the passwords you need. I mentioned that there are plugins that you can use with KeePass, and there's some really, really nice plugins. You do have to keep in mind, though, that the plugins used in KeePass are things that are not necessarily created by the people who made KeePass to begin with. They put a big warning at the top from this plugins link that's right on the main page of their website that these plugins are offered by different and independent authors. If you are someone who is very, very particular about security, you may choose not to use any of these particular plugins because you don't know who created them and you're not quite certain. There's a level of trust you have to have. You don't know if the password or the plugin itself is something that will grab your password and do something else with it or make them available to someone else. So to avoid any of that, they put this big sign at the top that says it's up to you to make sure that you trust the person who made this plugin, that you understand how it works, and that it's not becoming a different security risk for you. That aside, notice all of the different plugins that are available already for KeePass, and they're labeled with a 1x and 2x on each one of these, so you know which passwords are allowed with different versions of KeePass. I'm going to start over here on the right side because if you're already using a password program now to store things, an e-wallet or code wallet or any password, and you would like to convert that existing set of passwords into KeePass, this is some great converters that will do that for you. And if you've been using other password programs, you may have hundreds of different usernames and passwords. This can really help automate the process for you. There's some other plugins here that I'll come back to that talk about how to back up your databases. Having everything in one database is very, very useful. But what if you lose your hard drive? It fails, it dies on you, and you've lost that database. It becomes a little bit more of an issue. You may have a lot of usernames and passwords in there. It may be very tedious to go to every single website and request to change your password again and put in a new set of passwords. So this is a way that you can set up an automated backup, and you can just set it up and forget all about it. There's some other utilities in here that do some interesting things, like have an on-screen password. That's one way that a lot of people get around worrying about keyloggers, is it pops up a keyboard on the screen and you use your mouse to type in the actual keys for the password. Here's one I like the idea of this one, which is a pronounceable password generator. So you use these very odd words, but if you were to look at the password, it's something you would recognize and you could perhaps even type in yourself. And if you're using a mobile device, a mobile phone, an iPhone, some other type of device where you have to remember and type in the password very, very carefully, having this as separate words may help you out a little bit. There's some other integration capabilities. For instance, if you use Firefox a lot, there's some nice bridge programs between those two that can help open things up, and some other cryptography providers. If you don't like the cryptography that's in 2.x now, you'd like to use some other methods to store that information, encrypt it, and store it, this is a great way to do it. So you can see just the functionality of KeePass isn't just this base program. You really have a lot of functionality that you can build out and be able to work with well into the future, all from the KeePass website. KeePass is a really good password safe for you. It is very functional, it's well supported, and it's one of the most popular password programs out there. You can feel very comfortable that your passwords are going to be safe and that you'll not have to worry about anybody getting access to your usernames and passwords. And of course, now all of the passwords you use on every website will be much more secure for you. If you'd like to be notified whenever any of our new mobile classroom videos come out, you can follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/mobileclassroom, or you can go to our website at themobileclassroom.com. There's a Facebook link right there. You can like us on Facebook and be notified on your Facebook page. You can also send me an email. You can contact me at james@themobileclassroom.com. Thanks for joining us this week. We'll see you next time on the Mobile Classroom.